have a quorum. Welcome, everybody. This is the June 11th Portland Planning Sustainability Commission meeting. On the agenda today, we have items of interest from commissioners, followed by the director's report. On the consent agenda is consideration of the minutes from May 14th. That will be followed by a briefing for inclusionary housing update, and then a briefing on Vision Zero update, and then a briefing on building healthy, connected communities along the Division Transit Corridor. We are scheduled to adjourn at 2:45. So starting off, items of interest. Chris.
So I have a couple. Remind everybody that I'm the commission's liaison to the West Portland Town Center planning process, and we have a community walk of the Town Center area coming up this Saturday. I believe there are tours at 1:30 and 2:30, if I'm remembering that right, but it'll be on the website. So if people are interested in joining and seeing the existing conditions on the ground, you're more than welcome. As I'm sure everyone knows, it's Pedalpalooza right now. That is our month-long festival of bike fun here in the community. I won't show you slides from all my rides in the interest of time, but I do want to mention a couple that may be of interest to this commission. Yesterday, we had a ride that toured the new streetscape facilities on Foster Boulevard, and that's a project that got approved back in 2012, and the advocacy began 10 years before that, and the paint is just about dry, and some of the concrete improvements are still being finished off, but it was a pleasure to be able to ride in a continuous bike lane with a little bit of buffering down Foster, a road that in the past I would have avoided completely. I would have gone a long way out of my way to avoid riding on Foster, so that's great progress. And then on Sunday, first time ever, I went on a ride themed by a paragraph in our zoning code. And it was the code we added about drive-through access for bicycles. So a ride toured 4 different drive-through locations. So that was kind of fun.
Really bad timing on my part. Any other items? Yes, Daisy. Thank you for saving me.
No worries. I'll just mention to let everybody know I will be leaving this Saturday to do an internship with Policy Link this summer. So I'll be in Oakland. I'll be calling in to the meetings, but I'm excited to work with Policy Link. The work I'm doing is as part of their All In Cities Anti-Displacement Policy Network, and Portland is one of the 10 cities as part of their network. So I look forward to working with Portland and seeing how we can push our anti-displacement strategies forward.
Great. Looking forward to hearing all about that. And thanks for taking the time to call in. Appreciate that. Any other items? No. Okay. Director's report. Hi, Andrea. It's my first time seeing you in the chair, so welcome.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here again. So a couple things to update the commission. One is a reminder that the City Council will be adopting the city budget tomorrow. And there are a number of one-time funding packages in that relate to our bureau that I just wanted to let the commission know about. One is anti-displacement plan. Another is age-friendly cities, the Dark Skies Project, the Housing Emergency and Shelter-Related Code Reform, Economic Opportunities Analysis, doing the update for industrial and economic lands, and historic resources inventory. So fingers crossed, the budget will be approved with those packages in it, and we are working on staffing and plan for moving forward with those initiatives. So happy to talk about any of that as things unfold. The anti-displacement plan will be funding work for us to develop looking at strategies and tools that we can deploy for reducing displacement and keeping people in place. And as Daisy mentioned, we're doing the city and UPS is doing some collaborative work with Policy Link, and they will be coming to Portland in July and meeting with bureau directors and our team to help advise on Portland's anti-displacement plan. So we're excited about that. We're also working with the City Council for timing for bringing the residential infill and better housing by design, which we'll be packaging together around housing opportunities for this fall. So we don't have exactly the timing, but our plan is to bring back to council our anti-displacement recommendations for moving forward, and plans for further development of that plan, as well as residential infill and better housing by design adoption by the end of the year. So thank you all for your work on those two important pieces, looking at how to address housing opportunities for the city of Portland. Just a reminder, we have the Better Housing by Design letter that's open for your further comments. If you can, those of you that would like to add comments to that draft letter that will go from the commission to city council, please get your comments to Julie, Bill, and Tom by the end of the day tomorrow, Wednesday. And then lastly, we will not have our PSC commission meeting at the end of the month. The next meeting will be July 9th, and then we'll have our retreat on July 23rd, which we're looking forward to. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. Next item is the consent agenda. It's consideration of the minutes from May 14th. Do I have a motion?
Move adoption.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No, that passes. Next item is the Inclusionary Housing Update Briefing. Come on up. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Dory Van Bockel, and I am a program manager of inclusionary housing at the Portland Housing Bureau, and with me is our policy and planning manager, Matthew Schabold. We'll go ahead. First of all, we are starting with just a section from the comprehensive plan showing where the genesis of inclusionary zoning within the city started and led to ultimately getting the preemption of inclusionary zoning within the state withdrawn so that we could move forward with a local program. So quickly to review, particularly since there are some new members of the commission, the city was deeply involved in the passage of that Senate bill back in 2016. And then spent the summer of 2016 with an extensive stakeholder process reviewing the type of program that could be implemented here. After recommendations of the program were formulated, we were here in the fall of 2016 and ultimately at City Council for adoption of the program that went into effect in February of 2017. And so the information that we'll be reviewing today is the progress to date since that time frame. Just for a quick review of the policy framework and design, sort of where we were headed with the program. Certainly in the planning and stakeholder process, there was a lot of work done to calibrate the program specific to different construction types across different areas of the city to try to reach a nexus of the best balance of incentives and benefits based on the costs projected for a very broad number of different development types across the city. And certainly the mandatory program at the state level was for 80% area median income with, but then we wanted to make some options to alternatively make 60% of area median income units more favorable, as well as prioritizing units on site over having units built in another building or having the fee in lieu paid. So there was certainly a desire to calibrate things as such that the units would be provided in a mixed income building. So this is for all buildings, new buildings with 20 units or more. Again, that's part of the state requirement. And the city wanted to make sure that we had reasonable equivalency requirements, meaning that there was comparable quality, size, distribution amongst bedroom types of the affordable units to the market rate units in the buildings. And it was also a decision for the city to make the affordability period 99 years. This is a brief description of the different options that are available to developers in order to participate in the program. There's the underlying base option of 20% of units affordable at 80% of median family income. Then the option of 10% at 60%. There are ramp up periods that we have extended along the way that has come before this commission, where they are reduced at 15% and 8% outside of the central city for another couple of years. And with those options, there is the ability for a developer to take the total bedrooms that would be required and what's called reconfigure those into larger bedroom sizes, and therefore produce fewer affordable units, but allow for family size units that wouldn't otherwise be provided. And then there's also two options for a developer to either build units in another, either partner with someone or themselves in another building and provide deeper affordability there, or designate units within an already existing building. And then obviously too, there's the option to pay a fee in lieu instead. So to look at what is in our pipeline currently as far as, again, from that timeline of February 1st, 2017, and this is looking at anything that's in permitting. A portion of these have had permits issued. Only a handful of projects are actually built and completed as of now, with units being leased up. But within the total pipeline, there's 471 inclusionary housing units. The bulk of those are in with the 60% of median family income option. The undetermined ones are ones that are early enough in the permitting process that they haven't designated which option they're going to go with yet. So staff continues to work with them to figure that out before we approve their permitting. And as is somewhat demonstrative of the overall market, right now we are seeing the majority of the units being studio units, but there are a mix of 1, 2s, and 3s, and 1 4-bedroom unit or 2 4-bedroom units, I think, that are actually being created right now. To compare what the... Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yes, go Eli.
So sorry, this is Eli. When you're counting the units in this, if someone does 100%, 60% median family income, low-income housing tax credit project with a building over 20 units in it, would that be included in the totals you're seeing here, or are these just affordable units that are otherwise in market rate projects?
I didn't fully hear the question.
Eli, were you asking about multi-program projects as well as AZ projects?
Well, I'm asking whether maybe this is. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay. If say a nonprofit does a 100-unit, 100% affordable housing project, that is that going to be captured in these numbers, or are these numbers just picking up long-term affordable units that are created as part of a market rate development?
This is picking up any units that would be subject to that 99-year affordability. We do track any projects that are subject to PHB financing in order to demonstrate the difference between what the market is providing outside of that. So just looking at our numbers.
398.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is that the affordable housing sector in Portland creates a certain number of units on its own, independent of the inclusionary housing program. I'm just wondering how many units are created in addition to that because of the inclusionary housing program. Is that what we're seeing here, or is this including both?
No, Matt was about to jump in here, Eli. Let's let Matt answer.
Of the 471 units, 398 are in private market rate developments.
And so 398, he's saying, are in private developments. So I guess my question for you, Matt, is are those all private developments that are a mix of market rate and affordable? Or are some of them truly like the whole building is an affordable housing, where like 100% of the units within that building are affordable units?
For the whatever
Of the 398.
Of the 398?
Yeah.
Of the 398, those are all in projects that are market
Are a mix of market rate and
Yeah.
affordable.
Correct.
There are, every project's different, right?
Uh-huh.
And so there are a couple of projects that have chosen to build very small units, and so their rents are closer to the affordable rents, but they have decided to opt into inclusionary housing to have that 99-year commitment to affordability in order to be availed to other incentive options, so additional tax exemptions, exemptions of the SDCs, et cetera. And so we are able to count some of those units as inclusionary units because they are committing to the 99-year affordability and all of the other requirements of the program.
Does that answer your question, Eli?
I think so. Yeah. I just want to, I'm trying to keep these numbers as, so it sounds like the 398 is the number of units that are created through inclusionary housing that wouldn't have been affordable otherwise.
Correct.
That's the answer. I got the answer.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's being confirmed.
I guess clarify a little
Go ahead.
slightly more. So the 398, what you in your report refer to as privately financed, how many projects is that to get 398 units privately financed?
It's 59 projects.
59. Thank you. And can you, just one more clarification? In your last report, you have permitted projects, and then you have the term in process to permit. Can you break down the 398 units into what's got a permit and what is, quote, in process?
I have, based on our most recent reporting that we have published through whenever we have a Housing Advisory Commission meeting, and we have 325 approved units and 139 units that are still in permitting.
What's your definition of approved? So is it land use approval or building permit?
Actually, building permit, so that our IH staff has signed off and fully reviewed, applied any due incentives, and they're now in line to either have permits issued or permits have been issued.
I'm sorry, you lost me. I understand permit issued. That's kind of a tangible. You have a permit. What do you count as in process? In other words, how far back does early assistance meeting count? Or
No, in process would be something at least within the permitting pipeline. So they've at least applied for a building permit.
Okay.
Yeah, so our designation is a little bit administrative. It's a project that has submitted a building permit and is going through the steps to obtain that permit, and that they have engaged with our staff at the permit center about how to fulfill their obligation. So that's separate from any early assistance or pre-application or land use review. They're in the permitting process, and they have hit the Housing Bureau desk as they're hitting all of the desks at the permit center.
That's clear. Go ahead, Oriana.
What percentage of total units that are being created does this 471 represent?
Total units overall in the city?
That's correct, yes.
That's a tough question to answer. I think to make it somewhat apples to apples, in total, so for the 471 that we're projecting of projects that are in the permit process, so they have submitted a building permit, or they've been issued a building permit and they're in construction, or the building is open. So not talking about land use, not talking really assistance. The total unit count is 4,008. So it's just over 10%. Now, that being said, there's some caveats because there's still some folks that are deciding what IH option they want to choose. And so that unit count could go up, it could go down slightly. It's that 18 undetermined. And there's a couple of projects who haven't chosen at all, whether they'll pay the fee or whatnot. But yes, so for that kind of in permit or somewhere beyond there, just over 10%.
Matt, I have a curious math question.
Do my best.
Oh, you'll do great. If I'm following this, so of your 398 projects that you were talking about are hitting the IZ market that are a mix, and you said it was 59 buildings. Is it 59 buildings on the 471 or the 398? Huh?
59 projects.
Projects.
Yeah.
project doesn't equal a building.
Would be building.
Likely, but Dory, is it buildings?
Well, even okay, so if I take the 471 and I divide that by 59, that's telling me that each of those projects only has 8 units on average. Am I missing? Something seems off. And part of the reason I guess
math is probably right. I think there's so what we've seen is folks that are choosing the reconfiguration option. So there's a number of projects, and we'll get there in the slides, that the developer is choosing the reconfiguration option. And so essentially dropping a 20% or a 10% obligation down to a lower percentage by providing fewer units and more bedrooms. So that was the amendment that Commissioner Novick put on the table during the city council hearing. And so that effectively lowers in a single building the inclusion rate below 10%. And so I would want to look at the numbers more before responding on the fly, but that would be why you would see a lower percentage, is because of the reconfiguration, those that are choosing the reconfiguration option.
Totally following. Still seems like the numbers seem wonky. So, for example, if the average building is doing more than 20 units and you've got 59 projects, it seems like, I don't know. It doesn't, something seems off, but maybe it could just be because I'm used to bigger buildings. Granted, our work is typically Central City, and typically one building is about 250 units. So that's why I'm like, whoa, this is 59 buildings, or projects.
Sure.
Seems surprisingly high to me.
I can do some quick math while Dory's going through the slides before mine and see if I can get you a better answer.
Awesome. Thanks. And we totally held you up. Are we okay letting Dory continue? Thank you for your patience, Dory. You can tell we're excited about this topic.
Onward. The other part of this slide was to demonstrate the current monthly rents on average across the city. We're seeing new construction units averaging about $2,000 a month. Average market units for existing stock, somewhere in the $1,350, $1,400 range, and which is still higher than the 80% current rents, including utilities as well. And certainly there's a much more of a benefit with the 60% rents, and that's with the median family income in Portland still increasing over 8% within this last year that was recently published. So as mentioned about the reconfiguration options, so to, we've had in total 34 units that have been achieved through the reconfiguration, so fewer units overall, but larger sized units. And this is to demonstrate that, the majority of the 3-bedroom units being provided, for instance, would not be there without the reconfiguration option, because otherwise these buildings weren't even building many 3-bedroom units, and so they have purposefully included some family-size units in order to use that option and meet the requirements of the program. There's of the 2 4-bedrooms, one of them was also created through the reconfiguration as an affordable unit. And with the 2-bedroom units, a quarter of all the 2-bedroom units that we're seeing in permitting are going to be, or that are inclusionary housing units, were created through the reconfiguration. And to discuss a number of the projects that have voluntarily opted into inclusionary housing. It's only 22 of them, and it's a mix of projects that were either under 20 units and therefore not subject to inclusionary housing, that were seeking a bonus FAR for their projects, as well as then another handful of projects that decided to revest in order to take advantage of the incentives, including exemptions of parking, additional FAR, as well as some of the financial incentives. And of those projects, the majority of them have provided units on site. We've also had a couple of homeownership projects through Habitat for Humanity. And then we've had 9 projects want to actually pay the fee in lieu. And so we've collected a little over $400,000 in fee in lieu for projects that were under 20 units that wanted the additional bonus density.
Are you, excuse me, are you seeing the offsite option being used anywhere?
We have only a handful of units that have chosen it. It has not been particularly popular just yet.
Thanks.
And Matt, I backed into my math, so I can get it now.
Okay.
I was forgetting to take a certain the 10% of the total units, and then back into the bedroom thing. So I does that follow what I'm doing in my head, everybody? So sorry, Matt. Thank you.
No worries.
So 2 projects.
Quit scribbling.
2 projects have done the offsite option. So just to capture, on average, the incentives that are going per affordable unit in the projects, and obviously this varies a lot, particularly with the construction excise tax, since it's based on the value of the project, that will change a lot. The system development charges are only available to any of the units that are providing affordability at 60% or below, so we've only calculated it for those. And so not all projects are getting necessarily all incentives. And the tax exemption is only available on the affordable units outside of the central city and is for the full residential improvements within the central city. So on average to date, we've got about 11,500 of tax exemption per affordable unit, 36,900 for the SDC exemptions, and then just under 1,000 for construction excise tax. To note on that, for the tax exemption, that is the first year value that we're estimating. So there would still be a full 10 years on that. And this is a demonstration of projects both in the permitting pipeline, in process as referred to, as well as any that are within the early assistance and land use process as to where they are located across the city.
And how many of these are built now?
So as far as projects actually built with units being leased, I think we have 5, 6.
Okay. And at the moment, are they just represented as the permitting or permitted?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't have those separately called out.
Sorry, Eli, can you go back one slide on the
To the incentives.
the property tax value? Is that 1 year property tax value, or
Yes.
is it the present value of 10 years of limited tax abatement?
That's 1 year per unit. Yeah. Affordable unit.
If you were going to value the value of the subsidy of the property tax abatement, what would that be? Because it extends over 10 years. Could you quantify that? I mean, we could just multiply by 10 and do a little discount on it, I guess. I guess I'm interested in knowing what that would be for the east side, where you get the property tax exemption just on the affordable unit, and contrast that with what the property tax value, sort of the tax expenditure is for a downtown project, central city project, where you get the property tax abatement on the entire project. Could you roughly give what those 2 numbers would be?
I think we'd want to follow up with you on that because the numbers right now are blended, and we'd want to differentiate between the below 5-to-1 FAR and above 5-to-1 FAR because it does provide substantially different levels of tax exemption subsidy. So we could follow up with you on that one.
But just to be clear, to follow up on Eli's question, I understand you can't break out that this is a gross number, 11,500 per unit. But you could do a present value of, you're a better economist than I am, times 6, something like that. So that would mean that's a $60,000 number, ballpark. So the point would be, that's a pretty healthy public subsidy going into each affordable housing unit. If you plugged in 60,000 plus 36.9 plus 950, you're in the ballpark of $100,000 in a form of public subsidy that are going into each privately financed IH unit. Is that a reasonable ballpark analysis?
Sure. I think just with the caveat that for areas below 5-to-1 outside the central or regardless of where, but areas with a base zone or built of 5 to 1 or below 5 to 1, the tax exemption will be substantially less because it's only on the affordable residential square
Right.
footage.
So I'm the 11,500 is
Ballpark,
gross,
yes.
right? It's
Yeah.
the big building downtown. It's the 25 unit, 2-to-1 FAR building as well. Yeah. So it still would be interesting to see what Eli asked for, breaking the property tax into different categories. But I think the important takeaway is whatever the number is, when you multiply it to get present value, you're on a gross basis at a subsidy of 100,000 a unit on top of what the private sector is subsidizing. Correct.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of subsidy.
And I should say, I'm not complaining about the size subsidy necessarily. I just think that we should compare the subsidy provided to create an inclusionary housing unit versus what that same subsidy would accomplish through other affordable housing programs, and just trying to do an apples to apples. And the other reason I'm especially interested in this is I know that we're under a very fast timeline to come up with the level of carrot, I guess you'd say, to do the inclusionary housing, the subsidy that would accompany the FAR bonus. And if we're over-subsidizing some areas and under-subsidizing other areas, that could yield more housing getting built in some parts of the city and less being built in other parts of the city, just based on a formula. And just given all the work that we do with the Planning Commission to locate housing where we think is most needed, if that formula is deflecting the housing production of the city, then we want to know about that and try and address that, so we don't, over-stimulate housing in some parts of the city and suppress it in others.
Yeah, and we agree, and that's something we'll be looking at as a part of our inclusionary housing analysis in the next year. So, but we can also follow up on the disaggregation between 5 to 1 and up and below 5 to 1.
Thanks.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about permitting. We know this is a question that has come up from members of the public as well as the commission. So I'll just walk you through some of the data we track, and happy to follow up with any requests for more data or answer questions as best as we can. So the first set of graphs, I focus on the orange graphs first. And so this is that vested queue. So the 19,000 units, or an estimated 19,000 units that submitted applications prior to inclusionary housing going into effect. So for folks who haven't been with us for these conversations, the 19,000 units are the number of units that submitted an application between February of 2016, when the state first passed the legislation that allowed local jurisdictions to consider the requirement, up through when the program went into effect, which was February 1st, 2017. So there's a rush of permits, which is similar to other jurisdictions around the country, in order to be subject to the land use and zoning laws that were in place when they submitted the application. So we have been tracking this for the past 24 months. And at this point, as of end of March, April of this year, that number was down to 6,000 units. And so 6,500 units exactly. There's 45 projects, and 28 of the projects are in some sort of commercial permit phase of the application process, and then 17 of the projects are still in land use review phase. So we've seen some projects move through, we've seen some projects drop off, but there are still 6,000 that we would consider vested pre-inclusionary housing across 45 projects in the city. Is there any questions on the orange graph? Okay. So since then, we've also been tracking the permit data for projects with more than 20 units that are coming into the permitting process. And so we tracked, so how you read the blue graph is that we published an 18-month update in August of 2018, and then we have updated the numbers here for this presentation as of May of this year. And so if you're kind of starting on the far right of the graph, In the first 18 months that inclusionary housing was in effect, we had 8,000 units in some stage of the process. So either they had just come in for a pre-application meeting or early assistance, or they were submitting an application and going through land use review, or in the building permit process. And you can see the disaggregation there. Since with the May update, the May numbers are looking back the full 24 months. And so again, in total, it's just over 14,000 units. So 6,000 more than in last August have entered into the process. And again, are in some phase spread across units permitted, units in the permitting process, units in land use review, or units just coming in for a pre-application or early assistance meeting.
I have a quick question, Matt. Do you have a feel for of the units that were pre-vested? Like how many of those are now then have moved? Like I'm trying to figure out if we're down to 6,000 units about that are pre-vested versus the 18. How many of those have moved on to become maybe more real within the process? They've gotten permits, whether they've started construction or not. And then how many are just dead projects? Or, yeah, I guess that'd be the question.
For the dead projects, if they've been withdrawn or they're just incomplete or some other official action to remove them, they're not counted in the 6,000. But I think what you're asking is which ones are sitting there, but they're not going to move at any point. And we haven't engaged with the individual sponsors of the projects, so I wouldn't want to speculate. I can follow up. I don't have it off the top of my head, but as far as which of the projects have moved but haven't gone to permit, but have moved somewhere in the process between the 18-month update and the March update. So I can follow up with that, but I don't have it off the top of my head. But
And
yes, some
it wasn't
portion
quite what I was asking. I guess when I'm trying to wonder, so if I'm looking at March of 2019 and we're, like I said, down to about 6,000, are there like 2,000 of them that are now kind of shown below in blue because they're in the permitting? Like they've dropped off of the orange graph because they're, no, because this is all post-inclusionary.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, they're not in the blue at all. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Jump in for a moment. Chair, I asked that question of BDS, and they said it's really hard to calculate of those pre-IH what are still alive, because a lot of people try to keep them alive. And until such time as you actually want to build, then you get into a discussion about have you lost your vesting or not. So they just told me they don't have a mechanism for tracking the status of
Yeah,
those.
no, that makes sense to me.
But can I ask a question? So in looking at this, one takeaway is the pipeline for new units is healthy. I'm contrasting that with a lot of the contrary reports out there that say housing has slowed down, both construction of new housing and the pipeline. And we can. Do you see that from your perspective? Has the housing supply slowed down appreciably over the last 2 years, or is that not an issue that's resonating? I'm not asking you to say, okay, I'm not getting into discussion of is IH responsible for a slowdown. We can discuss what factors might be responsible for a slowdown. But do you agree with the data that shows there has been a significant slowdown or not? Because looking at this, I'm not sure this shows a slowdown.
So, and we have some graphs and some slides on this. There has been a slowdown in units permitted nationally, in comparison cities, and regionally for multifamily. Whether or not it's significant or not, I'm not going to comment on that.
In Portland, has there been somewhat of a slowdown that you've observed, or you find data to support the contention there's been a slowdown?
There is data that says that the number of units permitted in 2018 is less than the number of units permitted in 2017. We'll get there, but it's also more than the number of units permitted in 2015 and 16. So I guess it depends on. I mean, I think a lot of people have a lot of perspectives on this. we also don't know exactly what will happen with the units that are in if you're looking at the blue graphs, the pre-application or early assistance. Some of those are project sponsors coming in just to try and get a sense of not just inclusionary, but all of the land use and zoning and building codes, whether or not we've got a project that can work, and some will move forward and some won't. So I wouldn't say that I've seen definitive data or analysis in either direction at this point.
Okay.
So and to me, unless you kind of were to look back, like you just kind of commented, like on 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, this many units came in for pre-application or early assistance, and a certain percentage actually gets permitted.
And
It's
we
kind of
don't-
the only way to maybe analyze it for Portland. Just
And we don't have that analysis.
yeah,
So
and that's fair.
we've all talked about that before, and we don't have that analysis.
You weren't tracking it like that before.
Yes.
This is totally fair. But what's interesting to me is more so that I think I can wrap my head around is the actual units permitted, because we do have those numbers, do we not?
Yeah, and it might be the next set
Okay.
of graphs that I can go to now as a nice segue. So one of the things we've talked about this here, and it's been talked about in the public, is whether or not multifamily permitting in Portland is on the decline, whether or not it's moving out of the city, and whether or not whatever trends that are happening with multifamily permitting are similar to the region or other comparison cities or nationally. So this is some data from HUD. So I want to flag that only because it's their building permit database, which, at the margins, there's some differences in units compared to the city's data. I think it just has to do with timing of when units are counted. So I just want to put that flag out there. But as you can see in the top graph, we pulled data on 2010 to 2018 through 2018 with the notation that the 2018 numbers are preliminary. And you can see that the number of units permitted, this is units permitted in multifamily, is down compared to 2017, but above 2010 through 2016. You see in the red-ish color, that is the Tri-County area, so Multnomah, Washington, and Clackamas counties, after we've taken out the city of Portland. And so, you see a similar trend in the Tri-County area. And then we also included Vancouver as a city just across the river in the purple. If you're looking at the bottom graph, and this is to the question of whether or not we've had some folks say that, well, development is just going to occur outside the city. And so this graph is a proportion graph of the proportion of multifamily permitting that's occurring in Portland. So a proportion of the overall Tri-County multifamily permitting. And at least through 2017 and 2018, Portland's proportion was at a all-time high for the years we looked at, which were 2010 through 2018. So nearly 80% of the Tri-County multifamily permitting is in the city of Portland. So,
Got a question. I'll be brief. I guess part of what is difficult for us as sort of policy overseers of the program is we get so much data, and a lot of it is completely contradictory. I mean, you're showing us HUD numbers, which are quite different from this report that got emailed to us by the Up for Growth organization. I realize it's a developer organization, but presumably they have some basis for their data. And they're just showing totally different permit counts. And so I'm kind of stuck trying to figure out what data am I supposed to rely on. So just going forward, it'd be nice to get a template of agreed upon data that's most reflective of our market. For example, you showing me HUD data, your September 18 report used another approach to the data. And so I just, at some point, to help us understand, do we have a housing shortage problem developing or not, we're going to need to get to a kind of consensus data set, because I don't have the ability to look at one set of numbers, look at a second set that are quite different, and know how to make a policy judgment. So that's, I guess, the request going forward is to try to develop a consistent data set. So every 6 months when we get an updated report, we know exactly what numbers we're going to be looking at, and it becomes more of an apples to apple
Sure.
evolution.
We look at the city data, which comes out of our GIS hub that all the bureaus have access to track permitting. And like I said, well, the numbers are marginally different, and it has to do with just timing of counting the permits. Generally, the trend is the same. We use the HUD data for this for two reasons. One, because we were going to compare it to the Tri-County area and other cities. But two, is a publicly available source of data where we've had some folks ask us whether or not our data is accurate. And so for these slides, we wanted to use a source of data that you can go online, go to the HUD website, and pull these exact same numbers. So, but the overall trend, and we can supply the City of Portland hub data as well, is similar, even though if the permit numbers are off at the margins by 5% or so. I don't know the exact percentage, but we're happy to use whatever data set. And I don't know, in the article, I don't know what data set they use.
I don't know, but these numbers are more than 5%.
So
different, quite radically. So for just one example, you're showing in 2016 about 4,500 multifamily permits in Portland, and this chart's showing over 7,000. Again, I'm not trying to wrestle the right answer. I'm just trying to get a baseline we can all kind of rely on going forward. Because ultimately the issue, at least I think one of the fundamental issues is, are we in the midst of a decline in housing production, pipeline and production both? And if so, why? And I don't know if the numbers are giving us even an answer to, are we in a problem or not?
So, just looking at time.
yes, I will speed along.
Why don't you?
My apologies.
Let's let Matt get through his slides, and then we can kind of go through that and take questions.
Great.
Sound good?
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt.
So this is similar graphs as the previous slide. The top you've got, and they're just split out because they were confusing all on one graph. The top you've got Portland and then Seattle and Denver. Again, multifamily unit permitting 2010 to 2018 from HUD. And then on the bottom you have Portland with Boston, Washington, D.C., and Phoenix. And it's not presented, I wouldn't say that these are comparison cities in terms of overall population, market dynamics, those sorts of things. But we track a number of cities, and we pulled some of them to give examples of what sort of multifamily permitting trends were happening in other cities, which I think you can see a similar, a year or two here, peaks, and then a small reduction, but still at highs when looking at the whole time frame. So, one thing we want to talk about a little bit was just to give some context. Again, this is a little bit of the backdrop also of the original program, because we know we've got some new members here for what's going on in the rental housing market. So briefly, so we can have time for questions. The top graph is the Portland monthly rent from 2005 to 2017, which you can see has gone up by 70% over 12 years. We know that questions have come up in our previous appearances here with the commission and in other venues around filtering and whether or not it varies based on the age of the building. And so what you have on the bottom is monthly rent by the age of the structure. And we're happy to pull out any particular structure year you'd like, but we saw a 64 to 75% increase over 12 years, with rent currently being at around $1,100 to $1,300 a month. So similar, slightly lower, but similar to the city average, both in terms of increases over that time frame, as well as what the current median rents are. Comparing that to the actual communities that live in Portland, as you can see, and as I know you all know, there are significant income disparities for communities of color in the city of Portland. And what you've got there are median incomes in 2005 versus 2017 for different communities. And then on the far right, you have what the annual rent, just an annualized median rent figure would be for both market rate as well as new construction, because there is a significant difference between the two, as Dory had in her slides. The average for the market in general, the median is around $1,400, and it's around $2,000 for new construction. So if you're looking, we look at a lot of things at the Housing Bureau in terms of rent burden. And so if you're looking at it in terms of rent burden, you can see for white, Black, Asian, and Latino households, and I do want to note Native American, Alaska Native, and Asian Pacific Islander are not included because the data sets that the census had the ACS had were insignificant. They weren't sufficient enough. But a good comparison that we found in terms of profiles is Native American, Alaska Native with Black households and Asian Pacific Islander with Latino households, just in terms of demographic, income, poverty, homeownership, things like that. So you can see that these are all, in 2018, what did Portland look like for different communities in terms of rent burden? And so you can see that obviously communities of color had a more significant rent burden, with Black households having the most significant rent burden. And what I would say is if you're trying to draw a comparison to 2005 and what's changed, I don't have a slide, but for the average annual market rent, so for white households, you see it's 23% of income on average to meet the rent. In 2018, it was 20%. In 2005, for African Americans, it was 35% in 2005 versus 52% in 2018. For Asian households, it was 22% in 2005 versus the 28% today. And for Latino households, it was 32% in 2005 versus 38% today. So increases across the board, but more significantly for communities of color because, frankly, their incomes have not increased by the same rate as white households in the city in the last 12, 13 years. So as far as next steps, we just wanted to recap where we've been in terms of program adjustments we've made in the last couple of years. So in March of 2017, immediately after the program went into effect, we approved the rolling $15 million property tax exemption cap. And for those of us that were here for that conversation about the $3 million cap at the time, one of the concerns was we'd run out of property tax exemption authorization. So we took care of that rather quickly. In 2018, we simplified and lowered the fee in lieu. It used to be multiple rates, and we dropped it to a single rate across the board. We expanded the full property tax exemption in the central city. So originally, you could only get it if you had a base FAR of 5-1, and we changed it to be base or built. So if folks bonused or transferred in FAR and got above 5-1, they could get the full tax exemption. We developed and approved the Incentivizing the Pipeline program, which was to try and get developers who were vested to opt into some amount of affordability in exchange for incentives. And then finally, we extended the lower inclusion rates that exist outside the central city at the end of last year. Looking forward, I know folks are aware that there was some money allocated for some analysis to do some calibrations. At this point in time, there are no major program changes that we anticipate, but we will be, at a minimum, looking at these, and I want to just go through them really quickly as a part of the study. We've had a lot of requests for an 80% median income option for the build off site. Right now, it can only be 30 and 60%, and so we want to look at that. The reconfiguration option never went through a calibration because it was added by City Council during the legislative process, and so we think we need to do some analysis around that to see if we have the incentives and requirements right. We want to re-examine the calibration for homeownership. A lot of the conversation a few years ago was around rental, and we want to make sure that homeownership requirements also work. We want to pursue a full tax exemption outside the central city if the project is building or zoned at 5-1 or greater, where it makes sense economically. And so we need to do that. We need to do some analysis to create some equity between the central city and just outside the central city. We may be looking at the impact of opportunity zones, given that such a large area of the city, particularly the central city, is zoned as an opportunity zone. We've increased our regulated rents fairly significantly in the last 2 years, and so we want to make sure we're looking at that. And then we've got some other just technical questions that may end up being folded in and just caveat. So I want to provide that caveat that this is not an exhaustive list, but those are some of the things we're thinking about right now. Sorry for rushing the last few slides.
Thank you for doing that to give us time. So just kind of generally, if we could kind of keep our questions to about a minute each, and we can just go around, and we can always come back to you if you're not ready to ask. So
Sure. I just wanted to follow up on that. We recently were sent a lot of articles that were written in the either, nationally or in the Portland area, where they were, basically saying some sort of bad things about the inclusionary um, uh, program and asking and saying that it was depressing the amount of building. And I would just wanted to know, when you read those articles yourselves, were you going, oh boy, they're just completely wrong? Or were there aspects of what they were saying that rang true to you? For us, I mean, that's the big question for me. And I think I love the idea of the program, but I do want it to be effective. So if it's depressing our the building, the amount of building that's taking place, that would be a bad outcome for me. So go ahead.
I would just to be candid, I haven't seen a study or data analysis that definitively shows that it's depressing housing development in the city of Portland. I'm not going to sit here and say there's not an impact, but I haven't seen an analysis that meets any sort of rigor to draw a conclusion one way or another.
And I would concur with that in that it's complicated. Each project comes forward with its own circumstances, and the market's a complicated market, and inclusionary housing certainly does have an impact on development, but it's not the only one. Yeah.
Go ahead, Jen. Unless you've got another follow-up, Katie.
No, I don't.
Okay.
So, just quickly going forward, the study you referenced and you bullet pointed some things you're going to look at in the study. Is this part of the mayor's office has budgeted this $150,000? Is that the study, or is that something different than what you're talking about?
That's the study.
And is that a housing bureau project, or is it a joint planning and housing project?
As far as
Oversight, developing a scope. I guess let me get to my conclusion. I would ask, are you planning to do any kind of an oversight committee, maybe some representatives from this commission, maybe some private sector people, to kind of get at the concern Katie's raised, that there are skeptics and critics of the program, and it might be helpful to have a study where when it's presented back to us, we feel like there's been a sort of a broad vetting of the project. Does that seem possible, or is that part of what you were planning?
Well, definitely. Well, we haven't planned it out. We'll definitely be including stakeholders. I wouldn't characterize it as a broad market analysis, though. We know we have some specific calibration questions that we have. And so to be honest, I'm not fully familiar with all the analyses you see from BPS when you're doing the long range planning. I have a sense of it. There'll be some of that in there, but we'll be looking at a lot of program questions as well. But that aside, we certainly will be involving stakeholders, community stakeholders and industry stakeholders in the process. I just don't know exactly what that looks like yet.
It sounds like you've got a very clear scope in your mind. Is there some ability for a stakeholder group to kind of discuss scope and clarify and define it in a way? Is that, or do you feel like, no, you have a specific scope and that's what the budget's for?
We'll welcome input, but as far as a external body determining what the scope is, the Bureau is going to determine what scope is needed for the program calibrations we're looking at in consultation with City Council.
Did the budget that you received for this define at all a scope?
It did not.
I would hope more consideration could be brought to the scope, because I think it'd be helpful to satisfy a lot of policy concerns that have been raised, to know that the scope's going to try to address those. So I hope that'll happen. Thank you.
Steph, any questions? And don't feel like you have to.
Oh, I mean, I have so many questions. I've just been writing them all down, but in the interest of time, could you go back to the slide with comparing to other cities? Yeah, that one. I'm just curious, I guess, and maybe this is just an open question at this point, but because these other cities also have access to inclusionary housing, inclusionary zoning over a longer period of time, right? I'm curious as to, I'd love to see like population growth in those cities over the same time. What MFI looks like, comparative, and just what we can learn from in terms of their relationship to policy and housing inventory.
Sure. It's something we can do.
Great.
Well, and I'll add, if you have a series of questions, and thank you for being brief, but we can also share those after this briefing with Julie and see if we can't get Matt and Dory to answer some more questions for you. Okay.
Well, I came in with some of the same concerns Katie had, although I'll have to say that when I think about all the environmental policies I've been involved in over the years, I have to really consider the source of the data and the allegations. For example, there's a piece of legislation, I don't know if it's still alive or not, I hope not, in Salem that alleges that we need to start filling more wetlands to build affordable housing. And they've made this bizarre, bogus nexus. And I would just like to say I appreciate hearing the information from you. Not that we don't need to be, critical as well, but I'm just consider the source, and I look forward to some additional updates. I feel much more positive right now than I did 2 days ago after reading some of these articles.
Sounds good.
Daisy?
I don't have any questions at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you.
There we go. So my question is, what other factors might influence depression in the market that are not inclusionary housing? I've noticed we've kind of cast a little bit of a pall as a commission over that, and I'd like to give some space for some of the additional factors that may be influencing some of the trends that we're seeing.
Sure. So a non-comprehensive list of a few things are, we track other market rate data that wasn't included in here, and rates of rent increases are falling, and they have been falling for a couple of years. And that when rents are increasing, it tends to be a signal to the market to build more housing because there's profit to be made there. We're seeing the absorption rate of new units fall a bit. We're seeing vacancy rates tick up. Cost of construction is going up. Cost of capital is going up. Cost of materials is going up. So there's a lot of different factors that will drive overall market demand. One anecdote, if you'll indulge me, is after the inclusionary housing requirement went into effect in February 1st, a lot of the calls we were getting were not from developers. It was actually investors that were concerned about the 19,000 units that were vested because, that's such a huge portion of the existing stock. I don't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but it's probably 10, 15% of the existing stock in the city. So their concern was, all right, inclusionary housing aside, if all of those units do get built or some large portion, will that depress the market and we won't get a return because there's going to be vacancy in all these new projects? So there's a number of factors, and that's why I've been trying to be very specific about saying I haven't seen a study one way or another drawing inclusionary housing as the reason for the changes in the market.
Well, I think my colleagues have covered the ground on the questions. I'll just make a comment. It's just that when this first came through, this was one of my toughest votes ever on the commission. That my economist friends were telling me we were crazy, and my equity advocate friends were telling us this is absolutely essential. I think I'm still glad I voted for it. I think the answer is that to be successful, this has to be carefully calibrated, and I think the process we're going through right now is really the answer to the question. That if we have a process like this to keep studying it and keep recalibrating it, we're likely to be successful in the long run. So I want to thank you for engaging in this and keeping an open mind about where the various incentives and costs need to be to make this work. Thanks.
So agree with Chris. I throughout when we first started discussing it, and still do feel like, and you've already hit on it, Matt, is the analysis of the rigor of how to understand what is affecting the production of overall housing. And you just lay it out on so many things. And I don't know that I feel we're ever going to truly get our arms wrapped around what's causing cause and effect, except to say that they're all playing a certain role or a certain part. And we just have to always be honest about that. I am supportive of the concept of IZ. I think including affordable housing units within a mix of market rate makes a ton of sense. And I've always just never felt like I had my thumb on the pulse of, is the calibration right? So back to that, I think it's just a challenge back to, I think maybe all of you smart people who are running the numbers to try to figure out what that rigor is. And in time, as this all builds, I think we'll get there. It's just going to take time. Get there to a certain point. But to that, so as we move forward, I have just a few things that I'd like to have us keep in mind. Jeff hit on one, looking at your analysis. It's, I think, making sure that there is kind of a broad consensus on the scope of that work for your process and really built into that. So just getting outside opinions on what that scope that kind of Jeff was poking at, as well as making sure, I think, that we have real good buy-in throughout the community on that process as seeming fair and equitable to all points of view. This is a little bit poking at the last time. I'm not personally convinced that was a great process. I watched it from the outside, sat in on a lot of those meetings. So I guess I would hopefully recommend that stakeholders group that's advising and a part of that process is that we try to keep it as fair and equal as possible. I know you got a lot of points of view from that, and I'm happy to talk to you offline about my thoughts on that personally. But anyway, so it's just back to making sure that we kind of have a really good process. I'm a little bit, and we can also kind of go back to this, if maybe you went to the map where it showed where all the housing units are actually being permitted. And, making sure that we kind of understand this distribution, and it's back to the, is it being calibrated right for the right neighborhoods? And and I don't know that we're there yet, but in time, that's something to keep watching. It seems like there's a hole in the central city, if I'm looking at this map. A lot of Northwest, but actual central city, downtown production, or South Waterfront, or some of those areas seems to be lacking projects. And so there's a kind of a little bit of why. And I don't have any answers for you, obviously, but it'd be interesting to know, do we not have the calibration right there? And then I think that might cover all. I think that's it. Oh, one last thought. And this goes back to the pre-IZ vested projects. Those projects are running out of time, yet they may be really helpful if we're coming into an economic slowdown to help get us out of that slowdown quickly, because they've gone through a land use approval process. So, what I'm getting at is they're cutting a year of maybe design time and effort out. They might be waiting for factors that have nothing to do with IZ, but it's building construction costs or other things that are economic drivers. And if those projects were extended to a certain amount of time to allow some runway to a ramp back up when we might see housing. I guess I'm feeling perhaps, and where this is coming, that there is a change in housing production and that it has slowed. And part of it is I'm looking at the central city, and that's just there's not a lot happening there. And a lot of those projects are, at least I can tell you, there's a fair amount of units that are central city pre-IZ that are moving right now. And so maybe they give us some runway to get out of wherever we're at economically. And so just some consideration for whether those projects should have extension or not. And maybe part of it is, you can extend if you, go through the voluntary program, so you're still getting affordable housing units out of it, but it just maybe helps with the transition. So just a thought.
Sure. I think just to comment and make sure it's on the record on that one, I think it's definitely something for us to consider. I think we'd heavily defer to BDS as the managing agency for vesting and timelines. And I wouldn't want us to muck up timelines if extending it for one set of permits or one time chunk of permits would create legal issues for another time chunk. But we would definitely consider that, but we'd heavily defer to Rebecca and the Bureau of Development Services on that one.
Makes a ton of sense. You're absolutely right. It's their call. I'm just sure they're going to ask you.
Oh,
so
okay.
Would be my guess.
We'll definitely.
I mean, it's an important thing, because I think everybody realizes it means, some housing gets built, but it might not have affordable, and that's kind of why I think there was a timeline put on somewhat things, right, too. So anyway, it's just something to think about.
Sure.
I'll certainly raise it up with Rebecca as well, and that's all I've got. Any other comments, questions?
I
No?
just wanted to
Can I jump
offer a
in with a
comment.
couple
Oh,
of ones?
sorry, Eli, I forgot you were sitting there.
That's okay. A couple. One is I didn't hear when this follow up would happen, so I'll just toss out my questions. You can answer them afterwards, or just postpone it. So one is I didn't know when this would actually come back to us, so I'm curious about the timing. I would love to see. Portland has various ways of creating long-term affordable units. We've got a bond, passed since this inclusionary housing went into place. We have tax increment financing districts. So I'm interested in understanding the cost per permanently affordable unit under those different programs to make sure that we're getting, it's a cost-effective way of buying permanent affordability through the inclusionary housing. There are obviously some good benefits by integrating it into market rate developments. But in theory, we should be paying less per unit this way because we're also providing FAR bonuses alongside with it. As I mentioned before, I'm really interested in if this program's distorting the geographic distribution of housing in the city, and maybe we can learn a little bit about that. And the last item is just I want to understand a little bit better the city-county dynamic. I remember when we looked at this last time, there was a sense that by providing the full property tax abatement to the central city projects, there wasn't enough left to subsidize some of the east side projects, because there's only so much county money the city can spend effectively. I don't know what's happened since then. It seems like with the slowdown, maybe there is more tax credit, 10-year tax abatements that could be offered. So I want to also understand better what happens if the Portland is sort of effectively spending the county's money. I want to understand that dynamic a little bit better, which I think happens similarly with tax increment districts as well. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks, Eli. Thank you both for coming and patiently reviewing your findings. We look forward to continued conversations.
Thank you for having us.
Yep. Next item on the
Chair?
agenda. Oh,
I'm
yes.
sorry. Can I just jump in for 1 second? Just for the commission standpoint to think through what we just heard. First, quick comment. Your idea was interesting about is there a policy reason for extending the deadline for the pre-IH? It seems to me at some level that's part of our bailiwick. I mean, it's a zoning code policy question. So while obviously BDS's input would be enormously helpful, but I think it's an idea worth considering. And I think we should probe it a little bit because it may create some wrinkles from a management standpoint, but if it's a worthwhile policy, I think it's within our purview to suggest it and advocate for it and see if there's reasons it can't work, great. But I wouldn't just out of hand dismiss it. I think it's an intriguing idea. The other question I have for the commission, we heard several ideas about what people, the chair and Eli raised, we'd like to see in terms of information, the timing of this study, scope of this study, Eli's suggestion about wanting to know about subsidized cost per unit for all kinds of subsidized housing, not just IH. Would it make sense? And I guess I'll propose it. This is something Chris has done on transportation matters. Some sort of a letter, since this is a funded project from the mayor's office, a letter from us suggesting some of our concerns, that we want to see a broad process. We want some items we'd like to have considered as part of the scope, some things you raised, Kat, some things Eli said, and just so we're on the record as a commission, just making clear this is a zoning code issue that's of importance to us. And here's our thoughts for the mayor's study going forward on this issue. And either we could outline something today or maybe come back if people are interested in doing that as a commission, an advisory opinion letter from us.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate those thoughts. Any other wrap-up thoughts? No. Is there a thought on the letter? We'll have to follow up on that. Obviously, is there support or interest from kind of everybody on providing a letter to council in some way? I guess we wouldn't really be following on the heels of any actual process. It'd just be kind of, I think, a letter from us. Not that that makes a difference and that we can't write a letter. I think it's not like it's formally going. Is that correct? Yeah. So maybe just a raise of hands if there's kind of an interest in some follow-up on communication in some form with council about kind of where we go from here. One.
Yes.
Oh, okay. There seems to be a support for follow-up communication with council. So we'll work on that later, not today. Thanks, Jeff.
I agree.
And not that you were
I
trying
would be
to say
happy to be
today.
part of a small subcommittee that maybe outlines or drafts something to present to the full commission.
Okay.
Trying to stick to what we heard today.
Right. Thanks. Okay. Thank you for your patience as we talk through that. Next item on the agenda is our Vision Zero update. Welcome.
Thank you for ignoring me as I was just.
No worries. I think your mic's turned off, maybe. Perfect.
Thanks so much for having us today. I'm Dana Dickman. I'm the Safety Section Manager with the Bureau of Transportation. So I oversee our Vision Zero work and our Safe Routes to School team. And this is Matt Kelly, who does all sorts of things on the Vision Zero team. Today, he's going to take us through some of the data from 2018, a little bit of background, and then I'm going to talk about some things that we're doing moving forward and some connections to kind of vehicle miles traveled and safety and some things that we think we could have an interesting discussion here about. So take it away, Matt.
And thank you so much for the opportunity to share our work. For those of us who were here a year ago, we did a similar update about a year ago, and hopefully that was helpful for you. And so hopefully this Vision Zero term is familiar. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the basics today, but for those of us who maybe don't remember or not as familiar with this, Vision Zero is Portland's citywide goal to eliminate all traffic deaths and serious injuries. Portland City Council endorsed Vision Zero in 2015, and we passed, City Council endorsed our action plan late in 2016. So we've been working on this for about 2 years now, even though this is technically a 2-year update. It's been a little longer. So as Dana noted, today we have a pretty quick set of slides, I think. We have about 20 slides, so hopefully even though I've enjoyed your inclusionary housing discussion, it's very complicated, so I totally understand you going a little bit long on that, but I think we'll be fine for time today and hopefully have some good discussion. I'm just going to take you through briefly some crash data trends, not go in super deep. And then Dana is really going to go over a little bit more of the meat of our presentation today, and really hopefully provide you with a sense of our work going forward and the systemic changes that are really necessary for us to achieve Vision Zero. And I do want to make sure to mention that we have a 2-year update report that Portland City Council will hear tomorrow. Andrew Thien actually just released an Oregonian article today, so you may see it in the news today as well. So that will be available on our Vision Zero Portland website later this week, or you can go to the City Council website and find that. We also have posted now on Vision Zero Portland a crash data summary that includes some similar information that I'm sharing today, but just goes into more detail. We also have a detailed set of performance measures that really take you into the nitty-gritty of this work, and that's online as well. And so this is a pretty simple graph. I'm just going to start here with a broad sense of how Portland compares to the U.S. as a whole. So you can see the vertical axis is traffic deaths per 100,000 people. So we have a rate. And the horizontal axis goes from 1990 to 2017, which is the last national data we have. And the top line is the U.S., the bottom line is Portland. And you can see a couple things here. You can see that Portland has long had significantly lower rates of traffic deaths during this period. You can also see that traffic deaths have increased in both Portland and the U.S. since around 2010. The graph here is there's some rounding happening. So they're actually, even though it says 11 and 11 for the last 2 U.S. Periods of data, it's actually gone up a little bit. You just don't see it in the rounding. So both Portland and the U.S. have seen a similar increase lately. And so this is just looking at Portland data now. The vertical axis shows total traffic deaths. So this is just an absolute number, not a rate this time. The horizontal axis goes from 2009 to 2018, and the orange line refers to pedestrians, that followed in shades of gray by people on motorcycles and motor vehicles and on bikes. And so one thing you can see here is that pedestrian deaths have been on an upward trend in Portland, and we'll be talking more about that issue. A similar upward trend is visible for people on motorcycles.
I'm curious. Yeah, I like this chart because it validates my personal mode choice. But do you have a version of this that's normalized by passenger miles per each mode? So, sort of if you're traveling a mile, which mode you're safest on, and what the collision rates are on that basis.
We don't have a chart specifically for that, but I mean, overall, what we're looking at is kind of the best data we have, the mode split data, and pedestrians are dramatically overrepresented in the fatalities and serious injuries compared to what our mode split data
Right. The
is.
vulnerability of the modes is very different.
Yeah. But I wouldn't say we have that like exposure number chart. That would be
Thanks.
great.
And so you might have seen this map before. This is what we call our high crash network. And these are the streets in orange where we see the highest number of traffic deaths in Portland. This is an analysis that we did a couple of years ago now, but it was using a 10-year data set that, so the trends 2 years later should be pretty similar. And this is still the map we refer to in our work. High crash network streets, and you're all familiar with most of these streets. I'm guessing these tend to be faster, wider arterial streets such as Sandy, Stark, and Powell. The small white dots are the intersections where we see the highest rates of deadly and serious injury crashes. And you can see that nearly all of those high crash intersections are in East Portland, with the exception of Chavez and Powell. And just one other thing I'll mention, the light gray background shows you the parts of Portland with higher numbers of low-income communities and communities of color. Our Vision Zero work prioritizes investments where the high crash network streets and intersections overlap with these communities. And you can see there's lots to choose from. And this is the last slide of crash data we're going to share today. This is showing last year's crash data. Again, this is a map of Portland showing the first names of people who died last year traveling on our streets. And those are in the approximate locations where those people had those crashes. And so last year we had 34 people die total, and that's actually a significant decline from 2017, and it was our lowest number of traffic deaths in 4 years. But we know that 1 year is not a trend, and 34 is still 34 too many. And I'll mention too that you can see that in 2018, 60% of our deadly crashes occurred on our high crash network streets. And I went back and looked over the last 5 years, and that tends to fluctuate between 60 and 70%. So in a typical year, we are seeing a majority of our crashes on these high crash network streets. And then one last thing, you can see, again, we keep bringing up East Portland, and that's because it's a big pattern that we see. And whenever you look at traffic data, you see that a lot of these first names, a lot of where these people died tend to be on the eastern side of the city. And that is a trend we see most years.
So Vision Zero has really helped us to focus on that high crash network. You can see very clearly from the data, East Portland is a place that we need to prioritize. You can see very clearly that we need to focus on the high crash corridors. But one of the things that we've recognized over the last 2 years of work is that there's even some opportunities to hone in where we're prioritizing even further. The level of transformation that is needed on our streets in order to achieve truly safe streets for all the different people using them is pretty significant. We are trying to look at what is the long range change that needs to happen to the system, and also what are the things that we can do in the short term that actually make a difference for the types of crashes that we're having. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is what is articulated in the Vision Zero report that's coming to Council on Thursday, and it has a set of sort of strategic priorities. We are still looking at the 32 individual actions that are in the Vision Zero action plan, but this is honing us in for about the next 2-3 years on places where we want to put a little bit more of our energy. The first strategy is really around protecting pedestrians. And that is going to be included in larger projects, street transformation work, but also there's some very specific commitments in the report to look at leading pedestrian intervals. Are you all familiar with leading pedestrian intervals? It allows some additional seconds for a pedestrian to get out in the street in advance of automobiles. It's looking at protected left turns so that drivers and pedestrians don't have the green at the same time, so that we're separating those movements. It's looking at increased emphasis on crossing spacing on high crash network streets. So looking at where are there opportunities for us to come in and do some tactical improvements. We didn't share specific data on pedestrian crashes, but I'll just say the 10-year data set shows us that 71% of our crashes are happening at intersections. So places where people are crossing an illegal crossing, not always crossing legally, sometimes against the light, but they're still happening at intersections, and 44% of those are happening at signalized intersections. We tend to think of signalized intersections as the place that are offering the greatest safety for all users, but there are some things in our system design that we need to adjust to make them safer, particularly for pedestrians. So that's one of the places that we're focusing. Another kind of key area that we want to mention from the report is around left turn traffic calming. Of those crashes that are happening at intersections, the most common type of crash is left turn vehicles into a pedestrian. So we know that that's a place that we want to tactically focus. I mention all these specific things because I want to share that we're still looking at kind of dramatic street transformation that are needed in East Portland, but we're also looking to prioritize investment to do some of these kind of tactical changes for crashes that we know are impacting people's lives. Another big initiative that's been, we're really just continuing the work that we're doing for the past 2 years. Many of you have seen the citywide 20 is Plenty campaign. We worked with the legislature 2 years ago. We're allowed to bring our local streets down to 20 miles per hour. That's part of a larger focus on reducing speed citywide. The World Health Organization has done some great international studies about speed and is really recommending that urban speeds are no more than 30 miles per hour. I'll talk a little bit about why that is in kind of a safe systems approach, but we're really recognizing that as we have community members interacting with each other in all different modes on all of our streets, reducing the speeds citywide is a critical part of us reducing fatalities and serious injuries. Another big piece is designing streets to protect human lives. A lot of the things that I've been talking about are part of that piece, but then it's also about that kind of discussion about the significant investment needed in East Portland. The image that Portland has as a walkable, bikeable, transit-friendly city, most people aren't thinking about East Portland when they have that vision of Portland. We need to create streets that provide that same level of safety, that same level of mobility for all of the community members in the city. And so we know that that's a place where we need to do some pretty significant changes to street design. The fourth piece is around creating a culture of shared responsibility. I mention this one in particular because we hear from community members often that there is an absolute need to change the streets, but there's also a need for PBOT in particular to engage in education and information sharing and also in media campaigns around safety. So there's a desire for the Bureau and the city as a whole to be thinking about kind of changing culture around safety in the city at the same time as we're doing the street design changes. Thanks, Matt. So now I just want to focus a little bit on safe systems concepts because I think it's a really important part of the conversation that we could have kind of ongoing with you all. Zero is the goal. Vision zero is the goal, but a safe system is really how we get there. And a safe system includes all of the different parts of the transportation system, which is people, which is vehicles, which is roadways, which is behavior. And it really takes all of those things to get us to that goal of zero. There's kind of 4 principles in a safe system. How many of you have heard of the kind of safe system language before? Great, maybe just a couple of you. That framing around safe systems is really kind of in the birth of Vision Zero in Scandinavia. It was referred to as a safe systems approach to a transportation system design and engineering. And it has some kind of core principles that have certainly been leading our work. But one of the things that we're recognizing is our focus on the high crash network and on the goal of zero wasn't embodying the safe system approach in everything that PBOT does. So this is another piece of where we're bringing in a holistic system approach to how we're changing the city's transportation system. These principles are maybe not new. Some of them are in the Vision Zero action plan. But the first is that people will make mistakes that lead to crashes. We recognize that we can't build kind of mistakes out of the system, but that when people make mistakes, it shouldn't be fatal. So that's kind of a tenet of our system. Are we building a system that when people make errors, because they do, it shouldn't lead to someone's death or their death? The other one is kind of what I mentioned around the World Health Organization, that the human body has a limited physical ability to tolerate crash forces before harm occurs. If we know we're in an urban area, we have people interacting with each other all the time, people interacting with motor vehicles, we have to bring speeds down in the system because the human body can't take those levels of force. It's just basic physics. We can't interact as, soft, squishy human beings with cars going 40 miles per hour and survive. So that's just kind of a basic tenet of the system. Also, that shared responsibility exists amongst people who are using the system, designing the system, and post-crash care and enforcement, that all of it is really that shared responsibility piece that we have to build in that redundancy in the system in order to create safety. And I'll go through this next slide really quickly, but it's just how is this different from the traditional approach? I wanted to share this because despite the fact that we have had Vision Zero since 2015 as a goal of the city, we still have a long way to go as a bureau and as a city and kind of changing the way we've been doing transportation system design for decades. Yeah, in the whole country, really. So the safe system approach basically says that crashes are preventable and that no human being should be killed or seriously injured as a result of a crash. The traditional approach sort of says that there's a certain amount of crashes that we should just kind of accept and that it's part of the overall transportation system. A traditional approach says that the safety is the responsibility of the individual road user. We have standards in place and everybody should just kind of toe the line and everything will be fine. A safe systems approach really looks at safety as a responsibility of road users and the people who plan, build, and manage them, that it is a shared responsibility and that we have a significant role in making the system safer. It's really that's that core tenet, acknowledging that people are going to make mistakes and that we need to design the system to work so that people can make mistakes and not result in people dying. The traditional approach really looks at people to act safe at all times. Well, if they, would have turned on their turn signal, or if they would have done this, then that crash wouldn't have happened. And we're looking at, can we build in system redundancies that make it so we're not going to eliminate all crashes. That's not what Vision Zero is. It's eliminating fatal and life-altering crashes. So just an example, I'll run through just a few examples of how that changes the way we think. The standard approach to speed setting is really choosing a speed based on what drivers are doing today. If you look at a typical engineering review for speed setting, it sets it based on what drivers are driving today and the percentage of those drivers, rather than looking at the likely crash types, the likely impact forces, what's happening on the street. It's a very different approach to speed setting. I bring this one up because this requires more than just PBOT kind of accepting a safe systems approach. We need to work with our state because they actually have the authority to set speeds on our streets right now. So it's a big lift to get kind of an acceptance around safe systems. Another one, has this body heard information about PED-PDX yet, the pedestrian plan? this is right in line with what we're working on for pedestrian safety across the board, including PED-PDX. Another safe system example is really creating that crossing spacing, recognizing that human beings are going to move in patterns that make the most sense for them. And if we have signals half miles apart, we can't expect a person to walk down to that next safe crossing. So it's really a recognition of we need to provide regular spacing, we need to provide slower speeds, places where people can cross.
Something I shared earlier in the meeting with my colleagues was that I had been on a Pedapalooza ride on Foster with the new streetscape improvements, and that's a place where prior to those improvements, I think there were places where it was 3,000 feet between signalized crossings,
Absolutely.
and we're now meeting the 530-foot standard there, so it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. We don't have crash data yet, but I suspect we will see marked difference in the safety record of that street now that we have it in a very different configuration than we had in the past. I already mentioned the left turn traffic calming, so I won't dwell on these two slides. You want to? Flashing yellow turn signals, yeah. There's actually been a couple of that have already been removed because they were put in and we saw crashes go up. It's kind of under discussion about whether or not it should be something that we allow at all. But we don't have any definitive sort of like analysis on all of them that says that it's absolutely increasing crashes. The one where it did increase crashes was 82nd and Fremont, and it was removed. So now I'd actually like, with your permission, to ask if Pete Chisholm Winfield could come up and talk just a little bit about the work that BPS has done on truck side guards. We got some funding from City Council last year to work on updating the fleet, the city fleet with truck side guards. But one of the things that's really cool about the work that's been happening on truck side guards is it's multi-bureau and it's a very collaborative effort on working towards safe vehicles as part of that safe system.
Is it on? Hey, so I'm guessing that the permission was granted. Well, thank you, Dana and Matthew, for allowing me to make a statement from PSC, and also thank you to PSC for asking us to look into side guards. And so what I'd like to do is to provide just a quick statement to give you an update on what happened.
Would you mind just quickly stating your name for the record? I didn't
sorry.
catch it.
My name is Pete Chisholm Winfield. I'm a project coordinator with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. The PBOT's Vision Zero project is an important part of city work. Keeping Portlanders safe is a priority for BPS. We successfully completed a pilot project to install 18 side guards on 18 garbage recycling and compost trucks. And the pilot demonstrated a cost-effective means of protecting vulnerable road users while having little impact on the operations of the service. BPS would like to thank the Portland Hauler Association for their support and also the following businesses for their participation in the pilot project: Aero Sanitary, City Sanitary, City of Roses, Elmer Sanitary, Gresham Sanitary, Heiberg, Portland Disposal and Recycling, Republic Services, Walker Garbage, and Waste Management. And we have a very complicated system with lots of different haulers. So getting this many companies to participate and really we've seen them become champions of the side guards themselves, which is fantastic. So BPS is in the final stages of adopting new administrative rules that will require that all trucks have side guards. Around 200 trucks will have side guards by the Vision Zero deadline of 2022. And then 200 more will have side guards by 2025. And at that point, all collection trucks will have side guards. So BPS would like to thank PSC and PBOT for their leadership in making our streets safer. Thank you, Chris. And we look forward to completing the project and continuing to improve the safety of garbage recycling and compost collection services in the city of Portland. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete.
I would just like to add thank you, Chris, and we all know that you've been a real champion of this, and it's obviously
AKA
been a
pain
good
in the
program.
ass.
I would not say that.
Well, I'd like to thank Pete for all his work on this. It couldn't have happened without his focus. So thank you.
We need champions. So the last part of the presentation is just really kind of posing this connection between vehicle miles traveled and our goal of Vision Zero. This is a discussion that cities all over the U.S. are having around that vehicle miles traveled as VMT goes up. It is one of the strongest predictors of crashes going up. There's been multiple studies, both internationally and nationally, that if we see our vehicle miles continue to increase, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to reach that goal of zero fatalities. And that connection to kind of a multimodal system and exposure is becoming more and more clear. There's a couple of different ways to think about safety in the system is reducing the negative impacts of motor vehicles or reducing exposure to motor vehicles. This body has a lot of discussion around shaping the city, how we're looking at providing housing that allows people to use multimodal transportation, where we're increasing density. And I'm just putting it out there to you that this has a direct relationship to us reaching our Vision Zero goal, that the work that we're doing on land use, the work that we're doing on providing different transportation options is critical to us eliminating traffic fatalities. So with that, we'd just like to open it up for questions and discussion.
Great. So let's kind of do what we did before. We can just go around. You're supposed to wrap up by 2:15, but let's just go ahead and try to take a minute. And Chris, we'll start with you.
Two questions. First, it sounds like anecdotally, 2019 is not shaping up to be a great year compared to 2018. Do you have any insight on trends so far?
Oddly, the trends this year is we have a lot of single vehicle crashes into fixed objects. We just actually had a discussion this morning about all the fatalities that had happened this year. And there were multiple medical or supposed medical events that resulted in single vehicle fatalities into fixed objects, which is kind of a strange anomaly. We are at 22 fatalities this year, which is right on line with our worst year in 2016. We hope that this trend doesn't continue. We had 10 fatalities in the month of April. It was kind of an outrageous series of crashes. There isn't any notable trend other than to say we continue to have the most crashes on our high crash network. We know that that's where we need to invest and prioritize.
One thing I'm hearing about in national analysis is the effect of the passenger fleet shifting heavily towards SUVs. And I will admit that my household is guilty in our last vehicle purchase. So, as my partner and I get older, stepping level into an SUV versus bending down into a sedan was a lot more attractive. And we don't drive very much, but when we are, it's an SUV. And I think the theory is that the high front end of an SUV means somebody who's hit is less likely to roll across the hood and is going to get the direct impact force. Do we see that trend locally, and is it playing a factor?
We haven't done that analysis yet. It's funny that you ask because we just started talking about doing that, particularly related to our pedestrian fatalities. There is some of the national kind of analysis saying that might be contributing to the rise in pedestrian fatalities nationally. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a spike not just in Portland, but in other cities all over the U.S. But we haven't run the data to look at type of car and crash yet, but it's something that we're actually really interested in looking at. I don't know exactly what we would do about it, but it would be good to know if it's contributing to increased fatalities for pedestrians.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you for the good work.
Could you go back to the slide with the map of where traffic fatalities have occurred?
Oh, there you go.
I'm curious, just kind of looking at where the concentration is and around like 82nd Avenue, what kind of challenges you run into with the jurisdictional issues that come up with something that's technically a state highway and how that affects your ability to actually do this kind of planning work and address these issues?
It's a significant challenge. We have crashes, certainly on Powell, on 82nd, on Lombard streets that are not under our jurisdiction. And I would say the biggest challenges are related to differences of opinion in what is appropriate design and what is safety design. We don't have the ability to always persuade our partners that a higher level of design is necessary. I think our long-term goal is to keep conversations open about jurisdictional transfer, and ODOT currently has their urban design initiative, which may allow for some more flexibility, particularly on urban streets. But I would say it continues to be a challenge for PBOT on streets that are not under our jurisdiction to get the safety infrastructure that is probably appropriate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you go to the slide with like the old paradigm or the new paradigm?
Mm-hmm.
So, actually, I think it was the second to the last slide.
Oh, yeah, this one.
Yes. So, especially around East Portland, where we see so many crashes and deaths, I'm just curious about what your community engagement is like in a neighborhood or an area of the city where you don't see 20-minute neighborhoods where people, sometimes do have to rely more on driving just because things are so much more spread out and our, public transportation infrastructure out there isn't as robust as it is, in the CBD.
Right now, a lot of the engagement is really around just listening to people about what they're experiencing. Our colleague Sharon White has traditionally done pedestrian safety, but is more and more reaching out to community-based organizations and just asking them what kind of safety education they want to engage in. 2 weeks ago, she did actually just a getting to know PBOT for community members in 4 different non-English languages, where they came in, understood more about projects that were happening, education that was involved, how to get jobs with the city. And the intention was to provide an opportunity that wasn't around a controversial issue, but to give them access to people who might be able to help them with safety education, might be able to talk to them about a project at a moment that wasn't stressful. So some of the engagement is really more broad around just talking to community about what they're experiencing. Another thing that we've been doing is just working with for example, ERCO and Africa House and doing walks with seniors. One of the things that we hear often from community members, particularly new Portlanders, is that the infrastructure here doesn't make sense to them. They don't understand how to use it. And in East Portland, it's not only that they may be from a different kind of traffic safety context, like you said, the infrastructure isn't great. So getting them just more information about how to navigate what isn't a perfect system better is one of the things that we've been asking, or one of the things we've been asked for. Right now, that's really, I would say, our biggest focus in Vision Zero outreach is really talking to people about what they need to deal with the system right now, and then engaging when we have kind of a huge street transformation project on the project. But we know that those take multiple years, and people kind of need help today. So it's kind of a give and take, sort of typical project level outreach, and then kind of what do you need to feel safe, to be safe in your space right now.
If I could just draw, since you were talking about housing before, I guess I think of it as like you increase supply for the long term, but you do tenant protections for the short term, right? So it's operating at 2 different tracks, so that you're helping people where they're at now, also recognizing that there's some big transformational changes that we need.
That's just even on that piece, I think part of our role in East Portland is to help talk to people about the change that's needed. Despite the fact that the streets are unsafe, huge street transformations have other impacts, and people are scared and people are worried about being displaced. So that's another part of our responsibility, is to over time is really talk through what those changes look like, potentially figure out how we can provide mitigation, but also just kind of be there with people as they're experiencing those changes in community.
Chair, may I ask a follow-up question? So going beyond just the engagement where you're asking questions of community members, what are you doing to actually integrate community members into design of projects and being culturally responsive or community responsive in terms of how folks are using spaces and actually driving some of the design and planning?
It depends on the project. I think that one of the things that we have done, for example, on Outer Division, there's a lot of larger projects that are just getting started, so we haven't gotten there yet. To give you an example, on Outer Division, which you may be familiar with that project, we had 2 community members that were killed in one night in December of 2016. And community really came out and asked us to move quickly on investments and changes to that street. The way that we sort of approached that was we knew that we needed to do an expedited process, and we actually contracted with community-based organizations to do outreach around the project in other languages and work through organizations like Chinese Times, Division Midway Alliance, and a couple of other groups to essentially bring those voices to the table, but also to have the community members being able to communicate with each other about the project rather than having a BPBOT staff. So essentially paying Apano to hire community liaisons to be having those conversations. That's just one example, in part because some of the other large projects that would have that more robust kind of paying community-based organizations are just getting started. That I wouldn't say that that was perfect by any stretch of the imagination. One of the other things that we're doing as part of projects is when we're surveying or getting information, really looking at the demographics of who's answering and then figuring out what follow-up we need to do with, for example, PET-PDX is a good example of where we've used the data that came from that and followed up with our Vision Zero task force when they got their survey back that showed that it was only 2% African American, only 2% of Black Portlanders responded, and we have 6%. There's a big gap there. So that's another way, like just looking at who's engaging and figuring out where you're missing pieces.
Eli, you have any questions? You still with?
Still on the line, but I don't have a question.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Well, just a comment. Really impressive work, particularly the paradigm shift and how you're looking at it. In addition to the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure, I think I was pleased to hear you mention education, because there's still a lot of motorists out there that think that pedestrians only have the ability to cross at marked crosswalks. I've gotten into several altercations. It didn't come to blows, but they clearly did not understand
Every
the rules.
intersection is a crosswalk.
Yeah. And I think the investment in those 20 is plenty signs is really excellent, because even I, consciously trying to keep my speed down, it's pretty easy to edge up to 30. And having those out there in the neighborhoods, I think, is really helpful to remind people.
Thanks.
Steph?
Feedback.
I appreciate Oriana and Daisy's conversation about one jurisdiction transfer. I was on the Region 1 Area Commission on Transportation for ODOT for 4 years, and let's just say the jurisdiction conversation is ongoing.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. I'm excited about. I think also community-based plans. Could you go very quickly, just as a for instance, to the historic the crashes map, the orange one? That like for example, Division 82nd. We're seeing Orchards. Historically that was an intersection that that was community based, and like there are that is the highest transit ridership intersection in the entire system, 18,000 on and off boardings, and until a couple of years ago it was you wouldn't know it to look by it. So I think also looking at what is ridership and on top of anti-displacement strategies. And my last, I'm also excited about age-friendly communities coming into BPS. I think looking at things like not just lead pedestrian intervals in areas that have a higher concentration of aging communities. Because we know that as people age, they are more susceptible to crashes for a number of reasons. I think that that's an important thing, not just from a transportation, but from a design, a planning standpoint. And then I had one more, but I lost it. Thanks.
Thank you. Interesting presentation. Appreciate your work, your enthusiasm, and no questions for you. Other than I am curious about Mike's altercation, but that's probably not something you've heard about. So.
That's for later.
That's for later. Okay.
So I just wanted. I live in East Portland, and I've seen the advent of the flashing crossings. And when they first came in, it was like me as a driver. It was like, oh my God, didn't stop because there were so few of them. Now they're everywhere, and I think that's great. I was wondering, have you been? I'm sure you've been keeping statistics, though. Have there been any crashes at those flashing intersections?
There have. We have. There's interesting data around what happens with the crashes. We have certain ones that we haven't necessarily had people injured, but they have been knocked down multiple times. In fact, so much so that we are looking on certain types of streets at only doing the overheads instead of center mounted ones. There's one out on Outer Division that's been knocked down 13 times. So we haven't had a lot of crashes that have resulted in a pedestrian or a bicyclist or a motorist being injured, at least not the one that was reported, but we're seeing evidence of crashes still happening at those locations. And we have had some injury crashes with people hit at those locations, in part because the double threat still exists. One car stops, a pedestrian feels that they're safe to go, and the other lane doesn't stop. So it's something that we're continuously monitoring whether or not that's the right approach for those roadways.
And I would just add quickly that in some cases we're moving to upgrade some of those locations because one thing we know is that for transit in particular, where you need to coordinate the signals to help the buses move quickly, we need signals that are able to be coordinated. So the Outer Division project is actually going to do a lot more either half signals or leading or pedestrian hybrid beacons.
Well, I just wanted to say that I like them. And then one more question, kind of a local one. I noticed that there was actually some people that were killed, and I couldn't tell if it was Columbia Corridor or Marine Drive. Do you know?
On the map?
Yeah.
I believe it was both last year.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And were those pedestrians?
Let me think of. I'd have to check. But typically on Marine Drive, what we see is road departure crashes. People are driving at a high rate of speed. They leave the roadway. They roll the car. Sometimes there's pedestrian or bicyclists involved. One of those crashes out on Marine Drive was someone turning in front of an oncoming truck. And she was killed. We'd have to go back and look at it, but it's typically a mix of modes.
I was just surprised, that's all. So I was curious. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming in and taking the time. I certainly can say I greatly appreciated it. I learned a lot, and specifically appreciated hearing the change in philosophy of traditional ways of thinking. So keep spreading that word, because I think it's just it's enlightening, as well as I'm not coming up with the right word today, but it made me want to support the work. Like I just got it,
Great.
Brought it down to maybe a human level of especially unfortunately the way you describe bodies being hit.
It's just physics.
Exactly. And the fact that we all make mistakes, and we have to just remember that. So I appreciate it, and applaud your work. So
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is building healthy, connected communities along the Division and Transit Corridor. Welcome.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
Thank you
Should
for
say
having
welcome
us.
back.
Yes. So my name is Marty Stockton. I'm the Southeast District Planner and the Project Manager and of this Metro funded project. And I have with me here today my partner, April Bertison with
April Bertelson with PBOT, Transportation Planning.
So we're going to be giving a briefing on the Building Healthy Connected Communities Along the Division Transit Corridor project. Later this month, there will be a final report that will be released publicly. So the presentation today is a bit of a preview of that final report. There is no legislative actions expected of this body, so no policy or regulation or map changes proposed. We are planning on having a city council action later this summer, so there would be a council hearing on the final report in the August-September timeframe, and then the report will be adopted by resolution. So that's a upcoming action.
And I'm going to go ahead and start off with an update as well as provide a bit of background and context for this report before you today. And I actually want to start by saying I'm very glad that our Vision Zero team presented before, because I think it's an important grounding as we talk about division, particularly outer division, and part of the acknowledgement that more than just transit is needed. There are many needs along the division corridor. But at the heart of our presentation is the Division Transit Project, and we are trying to wrap around a number of needs or strategies to help support that. So the update is that the transit project is funded and moving forward. We found out this spring that the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA, is allocating $87.4 million towards this project. And this, together with local funding sources, will complete the funding needs for the project. And it is moving forward. PBOT has committed $17.7 million towards the project as part of the local match. And we are advancing safety improvements before the transit project that will begin construction this year. Some multimodal safety projects informed by our Vision Zero strategies. The transit project itself, advanced utility work, will begin later this year and then go into construction and begin service in 2022. And currently is in design, and we hope to be approaching 90% design later this summer. In addition to the transit project, we actually, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability led the process of developing the Portland Local Action Plan, which supports and wraps around the transit project itself, helps to implement comprehensive plan policies and vision, and urban design framework. And also meet many of the goals that were identified through the project, that's the transit project itself. And so the report that we're presenting today grows out of the action items and recommendations of the Portland Local Action Plan. And we've been helping to implement some of those and move further with more detail, which we'll talk about. This here slide highlights some of the early urban design work and identifying focus areas, which now align with many of our centers in the comprehensive plan. And the report that we'll be talking about today then focuses on the eastern focus areas, starting from the Jade District out. And that is based on where there was identified more need, and also from an equity lens where it would be most important for us to focus. And in the relationship, again, because that this is not just a transit project, that the local action plan wrapping around it is intending to set out equitable and holistic approach to planning and development, so that as we build a project intended to benefit the communities that live along Division today, that they are there to enjoy the benefit and continue prospering when it is complete and have the benefits of that project. So there is a strategy around community stabilization and helping to provide opportunity to prosper. And that is really done in partnership. We have been, as we came to the metaphor of synchronized swimming, attempting to synchronize swim with our partners in Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, Prosper Portland, Portland Housing Bureau, Transportation, Bureau of Transportation, as well as TriMet and Metro and others. So this is an update on that, but really to try to bring together how do we support workforce and business support and economic development together with preserving housing and having some affordability and stability in that residential. And then also continuing to develop land use, urban design, and coordination. And then on the transportation side, continuing to make it safer and more accessible to get around, access to the transit as well as throughout the community, and particularly in the centers. So we'll go into each of these areas, but I wanted to provide this grounding and both the local action plan and the report that we're here today that it grew out of. Another important point is that many of the recommendations and action items in the local action plan then made their way into the Division Transit Project Locally Preferred Alternative, which was adopted by City Council as well, and then also taken to Metro and was included in their the region's Locally Preferred Alternative decision. And so this is those conditions were then part of what was our support for the project, and we remain committed to those conditions and meeting those actions together with our partners, and also say significant feedback from our East Portland community members and more broadly upon OJ District, Division Midway, Opal, and EPAP, who urged and pushed us to go further, and we're continuing to try to meet those commitments.
So I'm going to transition now to talking more specifically about this specific project. And before I go into talking about kind of the high-level details of the final report and some of the recommendations, I wanted to talk about some of these, I would say, partnered work that are part of the grant. So specific to the grant, there is money that's allocated or is going to be allocated, to support of the Portland Housing Bureau. So getting back to the Portland Local Action Plan and the LPA that April just referred to, there's also this requirement that we continue to support the production of affordable housing or the preservation of affordable housing along the Powell Division corridor. And so this is just an update of kind of where we're at today. So right now we have 387 units that are in the pipeline along the Powell Division corridor. The Orchards at 82nd, which is the orange dot on the alignment, is the only one that is constructed, and there are people now living and occupying Orchard on 82nd, but the green are projects that are, again, in the pipeline. Garden Park, I just want to point out, is a project that Innovation Housing is the I would say the developer on that, and there are 63 units that are going to be preserved on that site. In addition, 61 units that are going to be added. So that's just want to call that out. The other projects are all going to be they're new construction. Finley Commons, I will want to talk about later, but that is a project that specifically this grant is supporting I would say the kind of the early land use analysis that needs to be done on a somewhat tricky site. So there's $40,000 from this grant that next week we will be awarding to the Do Good Multnomah, who's the affordable housing developer.
So real quick, Marty, and maybe I missed this.
Yep.
So were these happy accidents or strategically kind of encouraged projects?
The latter.
Awesome.
This is part of meeting our local action plan items and targets and the conditions of approval that had set targets along the corridor and each segment, inner and outer.
Great to hear. And so is this meeting the set targets for affordable housing?
So it is. The set target is actually a set range, and that's 300 to 600 units. So you'll see that we are meeting with 387, but we expect to hear from our community partners that while we're meeting it, we still expect to continue pushing. The 600 is the end of the range that was identified in the local action plan.
Great.
I had another thought, but it escaped me. So maybe it'll come back.
Quick question. Could you tell us what sort of incentives or encouragement or what successfully got these projects there that the city did?
Funding. The Portland Housing Bureau, between the time of the adoption of the local action plan and when we were before you actually for presenting this, there was not much funding. There was maybe 5 million, 7 million, a modest amount of funding that the Housing Bureau had access to build. So it felt like we had a pretty aspirational goal target of a number of units. Between that time and when we got to City Council with the locally preferred alternative, and conditions of approval, the Housing Bureau at that time was saying we have funding that we think we can meet this goal, and that they had a number of sources that came on bond and otherwise to help that. It's still a stretch. It's still, I would say, shifting their resources and focusing them in this corridor, as well as other important corridors, but they are able to meet it, which we're very grateful for.
And the 30th and Powell site was actually one of the first sites that the Portland Housing Bureau was able to purchase following the Portland Housing Bond. So again, that's the former Safari Club site. So that is, they actually were able to acquire the land because of the housing bond.
And so were the other 4 through PHB NOFAs? Is that how they came about, or was there something external to their regular process?
I don't know if we can speak to the mechanics of
that's
the
all right.
financing.
It's probably off topic anyways. I was just curious.
But good questions. Maybe we can follow up on that. So another important component of this grant, other than the final report, is the fact that this grant had $240,000 that was allocated to Prosper Portland, that then worked as kind of the pass-through to get money specifically to community organizations. And this work started in fall of 2016. Money went directly to hire 2 district community outreach coordinators, one with Jade Apano and one with Division Midway. And then additionally, funds were used for property owner development support, and then also business technical assistance support. And it's the business outreach program, which we call BOP. They were formerly with PSU. Now they've gone out on their own, but they have been involved with technical assistance. And so, to give you an example of how many businesses they're serving. So on any given quarter, we're getting reports from our community partners via Prosper Portland, and there's anywhere from 36 to 60 businesses that are supported in a quarter, a 3-month period of time. Most recently in May, there were 2 I would say business technical assistance workshops that were held, and this is a flyer of one of the workshops that was held, and they were really thrilled. It was a successful event, and a lot of folks attended. So this is an example of really when we talk about what needs to happen to address commercial small business stability and anti-displacement of businesses, this is the type of work that is what we do to provide that stability. So just wanted to call that out. That again, it's this grant for the last 2 years that has been funding that work in the division corridor and specifically in the eastern portion of the corridor.
So do you have a measure on that? I mean, how do you know whether you're being successful in holding on to the and not having displacement of business people?
So I can't speak to, I don't know if there's necessarily analysis that's been done on retention right now. So that's a good question to follow up with Prosper Portland on. Right now, as far as the data that I've been reviewing, it's more of tracking the number of small business contacts and the number of small businesses that are being served by the business technical assistants. So that's more of the data that I've been tracking.
And is there also a measure for affordable housing in that corridor? I mean, I'm sure there's an actual boundary for the corridor, right? And then do you know how much affordable housing you have now and how much are you going to keep tracking that as time goes on?
Well, so through Prosper Portland, again, their focus is economic development. So that's the affordable housing is not part of what they're tracking. As far as what PHB is doing, they're responding to affordable housing production and preservation. As far as is there a data point on how much naturally occurring affordable housing there is? Right, I'm not familiar. I do know that Dr. Lisa Bates conducted a study a couple years ago, and there may be some data points in there, but I'm sorry, it's not on the top of my head. But I'd be happy to get you a copy of that report, and we can see if perhaps
I
there's answer.
was just going to suggest that
Yeah.
that there be some kind of data kept to see if the changes that you're making are having the effect that you want them to
No,
have.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
One thing while we are on the affordable housing topic still is that those targets, the 350 to 600 units, those are grounded in the comprehensive plan goal for the city as well. So the 10,000 units citywide, Radcliffe, when he previously worked on this project, helped to do a calculation of how many, based on the zoning and whatnot, how many affordable units would it make sense to build in the corridor, and then dividing that up into segments of the corridor, and so it's grounded in what how to achieve that comprehensive plan goal for affordable housing in this corridor. The preservation of existing housing would be an additional consideration as well, but this target is for those new affordable units.
I do want to bring up one of the high-level points of Dr. Lisa Bates's analysis along the corridor was that, and I hope that I'm capturing this correctly, but the gist is that the Division Transit Project is a good thing. We're providing a service to East Portland and specifically to households of people of color and low-income households. With that said, from Dr. Bates's analysis, it's the larger regional affordability that's still ever present. So it's not necessarily the transit, it's just the whole region's affordability that is still the kind of overarching issue with affordability, whether it's along this corridor or elsewhere in the city. So that was kind of a macro look or a finding of her study.
And so you're saying that the transit wouldn't have an you're saying that the transit doesn't have an impact on the displacement?
That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to understand what you're saying.
So regardless of whether this project happens or not, there still is a risk of displacement, and that is because of regional pressures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is more uncertainty of what's the increment of additional market force from the transit project coming along, but I think it is
Right.
far overwhelmed by the regional pressures.
Okay. Yeah, I always try and bring it up because the East Portland is always looking at the pressures, even though we both want the changes,
Yes. Yeah.
and but we also want to be able to protect people.
Yeah. Yes.
So just to check in here,
Mhm.
how many more slides do you guys have
We have, I think, roughly 22 slides
remaining?
total.
Okay.
Okay. So
So let's maybe let them get through their slides and then we'll go through questions.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So getting into the contents of the final report, again, as April mentioned, the final report really focused on the East Portland, specifically from 76 to about 174th, so to the Gresham Portland city limits. And it also was focused on our north-south corridors, so 82nd, 122nd, 148th, and 162nd. And then we do have centers. So, the Jade District Neighborhood Center, Division Midway, and then also the Rosewood Center are, of course, centers in the comprehensive plan. So I wanted to touch upon engagement of the actual final report. Again, this project was kicked off in fall of 2016. And from that time to present date, we have been really focusing engagement more on our highly engaged and highly impacted communities. So we have been meeting with the Division Street Partners monthly since fall of 2016. And so these, Apano Jade District, Division Midway, the Business Outreach Program, Prosper, TriMet, and multiple bureaus, PBOT and Bureau of Planning Sustainability, have been meeting monthly. So agency and community partners have been coming together. Additionally, there's been, kind of the standard ongoing briefings of neighborhood and business district associations, participation at community events. In summer of 2017, there was a lot of focus on language-based engagement with people with limited English proficiency. So this is a picture of a Division Midway Alliance hosted event with the Bhutanese community. And really focused on connections and access and safety within the Division Midway portion of one of the focus areas. And then just again ongoing meetings with property owner and neighborhood and business stakeholders. Last year there was this draft report that had multiple versions that really went out to, again, kind of our highly interested and highly impacted communities. And a lot of their feedback and additions were added as this draft has been evolving. And then here we are in 2019 with a briefing before PSC and then council hearing in a couple months. So again, the studies of the corridor have been done at multiple scales. So again, Jade District, Division Midway, and kind of the 162nd corridor, as well as Rosewood. Really looking at kind of opportunities and constraints, and again, having a lot of those conversations with the community. Key connections as far as open space and connectivity concepts, placemaking diagrams, and then also focus of site level analysis. So looking at a site, looking at the existing condition as a phase one, looking at some incremental or gradual development of the site, and then what would be a phase four is full build out to the zoning capacity. So that a lot of site analysis that was included in the study. And then finally, a summary of access issues that led to some transportation recommendations. I'm going to go through these really quickly. I just wanted to highlight that the report has urban design concepts for J District and Division Midway specifically. So again, you can see kind of where there's some existing parks, where there's some areas of potential new parks proposed, notable or catalytic sites, green streets, missing connections. You'll see that there is a green loop proposed in the Jade District on this concept. And then specifically to this, I wanted to call out that the tied recommendations to the Jade District are that we want to continue to implement the funded Jade and Montevilla Connected Centers project. And then there are some new transportation systems plan and other project lists that there are recommendations for initial new projects to be added. And so those include the Jade Connected Centers project phase 2, a new Southeast 92nd Avenue safety improvements from Southeast Stark to the city limits, and then a project that I'm kind of excited about, and that's the new pedestrian bicycle bridge connection over I-205, connecting the Jade District to Kelly Butte. So those are some new transportation projects that are recommended.
Although just one clarification,
Yes.
the new connection to Kelly Butte would be recommended to be a study first, because this is a new idea emerging, and to understand how could that be, including that it would be going over I-205 and the MAX, but as a next step to study and then lead to a project recommendation.
Mm-hmm. So Division Midway, kind of a similar analysis as far as the urban design concept. Would like to highlight a couple of things. The quarry site, which is in the, I would say, the northwest portion of the district. This is a site that is the largest undeveloped site in the corridor, the Division Transit Corridor. In preparation for when it cease operation, the city should work with the property owner and the Division Midway community to develop a transition plan for the property. So just highlighting those are the kind of recommendations that are in the final report that are site specific. Also to implement the Division Midway street plan. And then in addition, there are recommended additions to the TSP and other project lists as well for this district. And that includes the Division Midway Connected Centers project, phases 1 and 2. And then finally, the Rosewood area. So 162nd and then up to Rosewood, I would say received a slightly lighter urban design thinking, but still there was some pretty important work that we wanted to include it. Specifically that there are some recommended related actions for this geography, and that is to continue work with the MPIs, specifically the Rosewood Initiative staff to further work on the shopping center site, which is their kind of catalytic or opportunity site within their district. Continued development of and implementation of the Southeast 162nd Avenue Safety Project. And then there are 2 new recommended additions to the TSP and other project lists. That includes the Rosewood Connected Centers Project Phase 1 and a 160s Neighborhood Greenway. So before I pass this off back to April, I just wanted to kind of end with the key recommendations in the final report. Specifically that from Bureau of Planning and Sustainability that we continue to do small area and site planning. And specific to that, I wanted to highlight, we have a couple of geographies that we would be interested in doing some follow-up work. And those include the 50th and Powell area, which is still part of the Powell Division corridor. Further work on the J District and Division Midway, as well as Rosewood. So those are really the areas that we would like to continue to do work and specifically take it from a concept to potentially a small area plan. And those could include, yes, they could include some map changes, but they could also include some zoning code changes to assist with addressing some barriers to development or some very, I would say, district-specific community desires. So that's some future work that we would like to highlight. And then technical assistance, and that's something that right now, there are a few planners in our bureau, including the district liaison team, where we do a lot of one-on-one technical assistance with property owners and business owners. And so that is definitely an ongoing recommendation, is that work is really important and really valuable. And then to do a street plan implementation. I'm not sure why that's, okay. And then for both bureaus, that there would be just ongoing new policy programs and tools to be, we never have necessarily the full picture of what today's existing policies and programs, that there's always further things that we could add to our toolkit.
Okay, and then on the transportation side for recommendations, we have recommendations are focused around improving transportation safety, street connectivity, and local access. And in service to that, adding several projects, particularly in the East Portland centers along Division or connection to Rosewood, adding those to our transportation system plan, major project capital projects list, and a future update, which might be coming your way in the near future. But also looking at adding it to other projects lists to be eligible for funding. And I want to say that this is an acknowledgement that there is existing poor connectivity in many parts of East Portland and unimproved streets that contribute to that poor connectivity, where streets that lack sidewalks, drainage, sometimes even paving and lighting. And so there's both needs within the existing rights of way that are there, but also large blocks that are barriers for walking and biking, and so need more connectivity to increase or decrease the block size and add more connections through. So trying to work both of those needs. And these recommendations really are reinforcing recommendations and actions from other plans that in this report we're reinforcing those and echoing the work that we are doing through multiple efforts. And some of those plans include the already adopted Division Midway Neighborhood Street Plan, the On Its Way Better Housing by Design, and Connected Centers Street Plan. So these plans contain recommendations we reinforce, that's a repeat, but in addition to update of the Transportation System Plan project list, some of those recommendations are focused on seeking funding to build more projects to improve the existing local streets and public rights of way, as well as pursuing funding sources, credits, or other mechanisms to help build local connections across what is existing private property. And that might be either because that property is already developed and is not likely to be redeveloping, yet it is on a block where we've identified a future connection would be valuable, particularly for walking or biking, and might there be a way to work with willing property owners to help make those connections happen with public funding. But it could be that from a range to, through the development process, creating some more incentives to get connectivity where we may not otherwise, as well as being flexible on design. It's more echoing what we are doing through others' plans. And
so if I could jump in, is this the last slide by chance?
Last slide, I think, right now. Yes.
Okay. So if we could, we've let us run over quite a bit here, and I know that our director needs to get going. So go ahead and make your last punch point, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I'll be brief, but I'll refer to the handouts in front of you as well. You have the table of projects that we identified through this study, some of which are already in the transportation system plan, some of which already do have some funding, but then also some projects that do not, and that we're recommending to be either added as a project or a study or amend a project. So that table summarizes all of them and provides a little bit of a status. And then the map, two-sided maps that I provided is an update for overall and within East Portland funded projects as well as recently completed projects on the back. It is slightly out of date. It's from 2018, so my apologies. We don't yet have a 2019 version, and there are likely projects that are added. But as of 2018, we had over $270 million allocated to building East Portland in Motion projects and related projects, some of which include paving. That are by PBOT as well as our agency partners like ODOT. And this is since 2012 when we first adopted the East Portland in Motion plan, which is an active transportation, a strategy for active transportation focused in East Portland. So walking, biking, and access to transit. And a majority of these projects that were recommended as priorities in EPIM are now funded or complete. And you can learn more at the website there. And that, I think, completes for me. And then the next steps, back to Marty.
So we covered the next steps. I just wanted to highlight that next week I'm going to be going before council to authorize the grant for $40,000 for specifically Finley Commons, which is at 54th and Powell, and will serve 38 households of U.S. veterans formerly experiencing homelessness on the St. Mark's Lutheran site. So really excited about that.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much for coming. I don't know kind of what timeline is for our fellow commissioners if you have time to stay for questions. If you do, let me know. And maybe just have Chris, Steph. That's about it. So we're going to lose a quorum there. So perhaps what we could do is get questions to you as a follow-up, if you're willing to kind of do it in a written format.
Yes.
Sorry that we ran over on the first item on the agenda. We appreciate you guys coming. This is great work. I really applaud seeing that you've been able to get those affordable housing projects put in and the work that you've been doing on the affordable commercial. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
We're adjourned. Thank you.